You know, for as much as I talk about cartoons on my top 10 lists and stuff, there's one similar genre that I've never really fully talked about. Video games. And there's a reason for that. See, despite growing up with a PS1 and 2, I still wouldn't consider myself a gamer. Most of the stuff I played were games based off of shows or cartoons I liked, nothing too mainstream. No Mario, no Pokemon, save for Yellow, which I never even beat, and as much as I loved Crash Bandicoot, I never actually played the third game for reasons that'll take forever to explain, but needless to say, since I haven't played the whole trilogy, it's the one thing keeping me from making a countdown for it, since it would be incomplete. And now with producing a webcomic and stuff, I don't really have time for gaming anymore. So yeah, this is probably the only video game list you'll ever get from me, since there was one series that I played continuously, one trilogy that became a staple of my childhood as much as the cartoons I love so much. I am of course talking about Spyro the Dragon. Words can't describe how much I adored this series growing up. From the simple fun stories, to the fantastic music, to the memorable characters, to the creative visuals, to the freedom to explore and go wherever you wanted, playing through this trilogy was like playing through an awesome fantasy cartoon that I would have loved to watch. No, not that one. Anyway, with the remaster of the original trilogy coming this year, I thought now would be the perfect time to talk about this series that's so near to my heart. The series that introduced me to so many voice actors and animation and took me to some of the most interesting, unique worlds you could think of. For the next 3 videos, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite levels from each game in the old trilogy. The only rule being that flight levels, boss battles, and home worlds are also included. I'm not sure why other people don't, but I consider them official levels too. So with all that out of the way, let's begin. Well, what better place to start than the beginning? The first Spyro game has the distinction of being the first video game I ever owned and played, so we're already off to a really great start. It's also the only game to have Carlos Alazraqui doing the voice of Spyro, who you'll know better as Rocco and Mr. Crocker.
Garbage day is a very dangerous day.
You have very good parents!
Anyway, the story involves this evil Shrek-looking dude named Nasty Nork, who was banished from the Dragon Kingdom for being a pain in the butt. Doing what? Stealing treasure? Mail fraud? Jaywalking? The game and its booklet never really say. Yeah, early Spyro wasn't really known for its sweeping epic storyline. It was more about the journey than the destination, and what a journey it is, because when Nasty gets fed up with being banished and turns all the dragons into crystal statues, it's up to Spyro as the one lone dragon still free to go on an adventure through all 5 dragon realms and Nasty's world and recover all the treasure, free all the dragons, and defeat Nasty Nork. The story itself is super simple, and the main source of the game's greatness comes from the well-crafted level design, the fantastic soundtrack from Stuart Copeland of all people, and the memorable variety of worlds to freely explore, including the peaceful artisans, the militaristic peacekeepers, the magical, magic crafters, the swampy beast makers, and the enchanting dream weavers. These are my top 10 favorite levels of Spyro the Dragon. Number 10. Metalhead. Kicking off the list is my favorite level from, oddly enough, my least favorite homeworld. Yeah, Beastmakers was always kind of a chore for me to get through back in the day, between the arguably boring music tracks in comparison to the rest of the game's soundtrack, that is, the near impossible flight stage, the dreary and gloomy atmosphere, the levels all taking a big leap in difficulty, with Misty Bog and Tree Toss becoming infamous for how many tears they induced, and the task of having to rescue 50 dragons to move on to the last homeworld. Yeah, suffice it to say, 9-year-old me was stuck here for quite a while. But then there's this level, the Beastmaker boss battle, and for me, it made suffering through the previous stages worth it, and was the one bright spot in this otherwise headache-inducing realm. First, you have to get through some pretty clever puzzles and gliding challenges just to get to the boss, including fighting a few of his monkey, ox, minion things who are launched at you at about 90 miles an hour. There's also a few semi-secret areas sneakily hidden around that are only good eyes and patient explorers can find, or people like me who had to look up a guide because she wasn't clever enough to find it. Then there's Metalhead himself, who's arguably the most unique out of all the game's bosses. For one, all the other bosses were magical in some form, whereas this one is a giant robot with a punk mohawk. And for another, while all the other bosses follow the same formula of watch their pattern, follow them to 3 platforms, flame them 3 times, they're dead, this one randomly decides to break the pattern and have it so that you're in one huge arena and have to destroy all the metal poles that are supplying him with power. What were the developers thinking that possessed them so late in the game to suddenly break all the rules for just this one level? And why did they decide to make the swamp world so frustratingly difficult? Even Nasty's world isn't this hard.
And this used to be such a nice swamp.
Whatever, buddy. Well, in any case, despite residing in my least favorite realm, this is a well-designed stage that gets points for its total uniqueness in comparison to the rest of the game. Number 9. Alpine Ridge. Okay, confession time. In general, I've never really been a huge fan of snow, ice, winter-themed levels. Maybe it's because winter's my least favorite season and I tend to get depressed around that time of year, I don't know. But for the most part, whenever I encountered a cold level in a game, I'm just sorta meh towards them. Which leads me to a side note. Why does every top 10 I watch have Ice Cavern on it? Why does everyone love that stage so much? I was constantly getting lost and losing health since the bat fodder's so hard to catch. Okay, rant over. So yeah, an entire realm based around one of my least favorite environments would normally have me groaning, but it makes up for it by having beautifully designed buildings, a ton of gliding challenges, the introduction of the supercharge and the magic fairy kiss, and the most funny looking and hilarious enemies in the game, but more on that in a second. Alpine Ridge for me is the exception to the typical snow levels, and it's a great first level for the Magic Crafters realm and contains some of my favorite funniest moments in the game. The key word for this level is timing. Nearly every jump and every glide has to be timed perfectly since there's wizards all over the place who keep messing with the environment. I give kudos to the game designers because between this and the intro to the supercharge and the next stage, I think the developers were very subtly trying to prepare you for all the charging and gliding challenges to come in the next 2 homeworlds. But anyway, on the topic of the enemies, the wizards and druids were always my favorite enemies in this game. Not just for how goofy they look, but also how they sound. The tiny little ow sound they make when you hit them, or how they laugh at you when they get the upper hand, or the little babbling noises they make for their speech if you listen close enough. Sometimes if you take it slow enough, you can even spot the druids playing around with their giant monster pet things. But my favorite is the green wizards. They're one of the only ones that don't attack you if you get close enough. Instead, they're self-aware enough to know that they're screwed and they do this. Yeah, run you little cowards, run! Bottom line, this is a great first true jump in difficulty in the game, which takes advantage of the mountain theme by having nice gliding challenges and hilarious enemies to fight. Number 8. Dark Hollow. A very early level and quite possibly the smallest and shortest one in the game, but still very fun. This is a great tutorial level that teaches you the basic mechanics of combat in the game, mainly how to charge enemies with metal and flame the ones that are too big, which makes the big enemies wearing metal a bit of a challenge, but not too hard if you wait for the right moment. And again, little me may not have realized it at the time, but looking back, here's another level that sneakily gets you ready for future stages down the line. And I'm not just talking about the basic combat mechanics, I also mean a certain boss fight coming in the next homeworld. Oh yeah, we'll get back to him in a little bit here. See, this is the sign of great game design. They don't just blatantly explain everything to you. They instead give you just enough hints to point you in the right direction, then leave it to you to figure out the rest. And by going through stages like this, they're actually teaching you stuff without you even realizing it, so when you encounter similar challenges later on, it just feels like a natural progression of the the adventure. But besides game mechanics, the real reason I love this place is just how relaxing it is. The pretty nighttime sky, the nice blues and greens, the catchy but calming music, everything about this place just wants you to take a breather. Not to mention the glow of the campfires near this staircase here. I remember the first time I accidentally flamed one of these and flipped out upon finding out, wait, I thought this was just part of the background. You can actually affect the environment? Sounds silly, but remember, this was my first video game. I didn't know what to expect, and I love discovering little surprises like this. All in all, this is a really nice beginner's level with a chill vibe that teaches you so much with so little. Number 7. Dark Passage. Well, how about that? Another dark level, only this time we trade a beginner's stage for one of the last stages of the adventure. This one seems to take a little bit of what I liked in both Dark Hollow and Alpine Ridge and combines it together. It borrows from Dark Hollow in that it has another great nighttime color palette with deep purples set against nice blues and warm golds from the lanterns. And I get Alpine Ridge flashbacks since this stage also relies on your gliding skills that need to be timed perfectly, only instead of wizards changing the environment, we have these magic jester guys that can change the enemies. If their lanterns go out, these cute and cuddly looking turtles and dogs will turn into this. This also has one of my favorite dragons in it, mainly for how he sounds. His voice is just so deep and stands out from all the other dragons.
The enemies here can be quite frightening, but you should watch the fools.
I'd rather flame the fools.
Now you're thinking.
Dang, that voice is awesome. Also, much like Metalhead and, well, really a great number of levels in this game, there's a noteworthy secret area that takes a clever eye and well-timed glide to get to, which made me feel super clever when I found it. Bottom line, this is a great first stage for the Dreamweaver's realm, taking all the things I liked from past levels and combining them together. And let's just say this isn't the last time we'll be visiting this particular homeworld. Number 6. The Artisan's Homeworld. Ah, Artisans. Arguably one of the best introductory levels or areas in a fantasy game, one which will forever be sealed in my memory when I think back on my childhood. Oddly enough, when I think of sword and sorcery fantasy, this is one of the first images that comes to my mind. A pleasant looking landscape with castles, goblins, and dragons. Even though it's a small hub world, I remember spending so much time just running around soaking in the grassy hills and the pretty color palette, not to mention the amazing soundtrack that to me is the best out of all the homeworlds. Seriously, when I think of Spyro the Dragon, this is the music that I immediately think of more than any other track in the whole trilogy. It's that iconic to me. The developers also had the ingenious idea to hide one of the levels in plain sight. By jumping on all of these stones by this waterfall, you can uncover the Artisan's flight level, and the only way you find out about this is by rescuing a dragon. Way later in one of the Magic Crafter stages. Yes, even this far back, the game subtly introduced the concept of backtracking, revisiting earlier levels with new powers and or new information, even if it was just for this one instance. But what's also awesome is that finding that dragon isn't required. If you're that explorative and or just blindly messing around, you can wind up activating this secret right away by accident, which I'm sure blew kids' minds back then. If you press yourself up against the wall, you can even hear the jingling sound of the portal behind the wall. And thinking about it, it makes sense. The area just invites curiosity. Why have this plain looking wall with this waterfall and stepping stones if it doesn't lead to anything? It's a very subtle hint that when you discover the secret, it then makes you think, what other secrets am I possibly missing? Simple but charming, Artisans will go down as one of the best introductions I've ever seen in a game and one of the most memorable moments of my childhood. Number 5. Dr. Shemp. Hey, another boss level. Like I explained in number 10, pretty much all the bosses in this game follow the same sort of pattern. You follow them the 3 platforms, flame them 3 times, done. But while Metalhead stood out as being the only boss that broke from the formula, this one stands out for having the most memorable personality, at least to me. Yeah, Toasty is funny for the memorable reveal of him being a sheep on stilts, but personally, I just like this one better. For one thing, the road leading up to him is hilarious, with this really kooky sounding music that sounds like a pack of hyenas constantly laughing. This totally compliments these chicken lady people slapping these guys on the butt, to which they scream at you like maniacs. Even funnier is that fighting them is totally optional. If you don't attack and simply jump over them, they will do this. Seriously, what the heck? Anyway, when you finally face this witch doctor dude who does not look like he should be with Mo or Larry, you'll quickly see why I like him so much. Not counting Nasty Nork, he's the only boss that talks. Sort of. And he's just so freaking smug and cocky. Look at those sunglasses, what an a-hole. Which makes it all the more satisfying when you literally set his butt on fire. Also, remember what I said about Dark Hollow and how this game teaches you stuff? This is what I meant. The developers have faith that you're smart enough to remember earlier levels and apply what you've learned. They're expecting you to go, wait, didn't I fight a guy like this way back in that other stage in the previous realm? I think I know what to do. Again, awesome foreshadowing there. Both Peacekeepers and Magic Crafters had their share of funny enemies, but for me, Peacekeepers holds the award for having the best boss. Or at least the funniest one. Now let's see that guy jump off the cliff again. Number 4. Stone Hill. And once again, we're back in Artisans. Yes, I know most of these levels serve as tutorials and are fairly easy, but I can't help it. Artisans is one of my favorite realms and holds a lot of nostalgia for me since it was the first fantasy world I was ever introduced to in a video game. And Stone Hill exemplifies that perfectly, since to me it looks sort of like an extension of the Artisans' homeworld. Like, if we were to go into one of these castles or over one of these hills, I can imagine Stone Hill being right behind it. Not to mention that in the 2 sequels, whenever the story begins in the Dragon Realm, the cutscenes seem to be taking place in Stone Hill, judging by the well in the castle courtyard, so the developers must have had an affection for this place too. And it's easy to see why. The place is super calm and mellow, with some out-of-the-way areas to explore, one of which is this little beach area that's fairly well hidden. It's also the first appearance of the Egg Thieves, which, contrary to most opinion, I actually liked these guys. It was always fun chasing them down, and I always wondered what they looked like under those robes. I guess they kind of reminded me of Marvin the Martian a little bit. And there's no denying that, for better or worse, they're the most infamous enemies in the game with that signature laugh of theirs. Also, the music is almost as good as the Artisans theme, so much so that when the first trailer dropped for the Reignited trilogy, even remixed, I instantly recognized the Stone Hill music in the background. It's seared that much in my memory. Simply put, this is a very relaxing stage that I could run around in for hours, and it's a great introduction to an even greater adventure. Number 3. Nork Cove. Proof how well designed and varied all the realms are, since I now have at least one level per homeworld in this list somewhere. And for how minuscule Nasty's world is, at least this game bothered to give the villain his own realm, unlike the sequels where we don't even see where Ripto or the Sorceress come from. Anyway, most people seem to pick Twilight Harbor as their favorite, though I'm not sure why. I thought the bright orange sky was kinda hard on the eyes, not to mention how easily you can lose lives there if you're not careful, though it makes sense since it's the last level before facing Nasty. Personally, I just enjoy Nork Cove far more. I just have more fun with this one, and considering how you're gliding around at different boats and ships and stuff, why wasn't this level called Twilight Harbor? It seems more like a harbor than the other level. But anyway, I love the soundtrack here. It pulls off the industrial sound perfectly while still being catchy. and the enemies are funny, getting blown up and their clothes blown off like an old Looney Tunes cartoon. And the gimmick of them throwing barrels at you and having to use their own weapons against them is pretty clever. And since I didn't have a Nintendo, this was the closest to playing Donkey Kong that I'd ever get. And the developers must have liked this level, or at least remembered it, because the idea is repeated again in the sequel in the Zephyr stage. It's funny, it tests your reflexes, and it's a great last hurrah before the final boss. Number 2. The Dreamweaver's Homeworld. For as much as I gushed about how much I love the Artisan's world, there is one realm that I enjoy just a bit more, and that's this one. And it's fitting that they'd save the best for last. Dreamweaver's has some of the best visuals and the most unique ideas out of all the realms, which makes sense considering the dragons of this world deal exclusively with helping people have nice dreams. Like Freddy Krueger. Only if he were a good guy. As such, this world is bursting at the seams with magic and all sorts of insane weirdness, from fairies that grant you special abilities, to these elf guys that change the environment when you attack them, to these weird enemies that magically grow and shrink and have the most hilarious voices. Best of all, you can eventually make it to where the magic cannon is and use it to permanently change the enemies. In fact, you need to do this just to access the rest of the castle where the flight level is. I also like the colorful beam that comes out of it. Taste the rainbow, biatch! On a final note, what makes this realm a bit sad in hindsight is the fact that if you're collecting as much treasure as you can throughout the rest of the game, you'll already have the 6,000 treasure you need to pay the balloonist to go to Nasty's world. And if you're not really concerned about completion and just want to beat the game, this entire realm is completely skippable if you want. And it's a huge shame because virtually all the levels here have some of the most creative ideas in the game. And to quote Mr. T, I pity the fool who decides to bypass it in favor of just wanting to skip to the end as fast as possible because they don't know what a fantastic realm they're missing out on. And my number 1 favorite level in Spyro the Dragon is Haunted Towers. Yes, folks, another Dreamweaver's level, and weirdly enough, this is largely considered to be one of the most difficult stages in the game, second only to Treetops, for reasons I'll get into in a moment. So why do I love this level so much? Well, really, it's everything. The gimmick here is that there's wizards that, much like in Magic Crafters, are messing with the environment, in this case bringing suits of armor to life. They're also terrorizing the fairies here that when you rescue them can temporarily give you a super flame power-up that can make your flame attack work on metal. So in a weird role reversal, now it's the dragon who's slaying the knights. I love exploring this castle, I love its design and the color palette all throughout this stage, and it's a fun challenge getting through here between having to use all the abilities you've learned and the fairy magic to fight most of the enemies here, and having to race through some sections since the fairy kiss only lasts for about 10 seconds. Except in one instance, which leads me to the part that had players everywhere stumped, including me for the longest time. For as tricky as Treetops is, at least you're able to see where that out-of-the-way dragon is, giving you some clue as to what you do. Here, though, if you're like me and many others, you reach the end of the level only to find that you were missing some treasure in a dragon. So where the heck is it? Well, if you go back to this room here, you'll notice something interesting. There's a hole in the ceiling, and if you jump and angle the camera just right, you can just barely see the dragon up there. But how do you get up there? I tried using this obvious ramp out here, but it doesn't work. The turn is too tight and it doesn't lead to anything. So now what? Well, if Dreamweavers teaches anything, it's that in this realm, logic goes right out the freaking window. Turns out there is a ramp you have to use the supercharge on, and it's hidden in plain sight. Watch carefully. I know, right? I flipped out too when I finally discovered it. Even weirder, you can clearly see the platform early on, but there's no dragon or treasure or anything to indicate it's a special place. At first glance, it just looks like another section of the castle you'll be exploring later on. Evil on the developer's part? Maybe, but at least your cleverness is rewarded because when you save the fairy at the top of this tower, the super flame is permanent. Too bad it's not in effect for the rest of the game, but feel free to go full Rambo on everyone and everything in the rest of the castle. And on a final note, the last reason I love this stage so much, the music. Good lord, how I love this soundtrack. Every time I played the game, I was always excited to get to this stage, mostly because I knew this music was coming. It's such a catchy track that really makes me wish that these games got an official release on CD or something. This isn't just my favorite track in the game, it's my favorite track in the entire trilogy, bar none. Great music, unique enemies, special abilities, and having one of the most well-hidden secrets in the game, Haunted Towers easily takes the #1 spot as my pick for my favorite level. I'm Cartoon12 and I hope you enjoyed the countdown. Be sure to stay tuned as I'll have my commentary on the sequel games up soon, and links will be in the description below. If you like what you've seen, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.